Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the One Thing podcast. We're here with Dr. Jessica Kriegel, who is the Chief Scientist of Workplace Culture for Culture Partners, leading research and strategy and best practices for driving results through culture. Jessica applies data-driven insights to dismantle the chaos of poor morale, low performance, and missed financial goals. She's a Fortune 100 thought leader and international keynote speaker, as well as author of Unfairly Labeled: How Your Workplace Can Benefit from Ditching Generational Stereotypes. Welcome, Jessica. We're excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I love sort of like the pin in your book for me was that culture is not ping pong tables. It's how people think and drive results. And I feel like this idea, I'm excited to have this conversation because as two people who own businesses, run businesses, and talk to a lot of people who run, own, and consult businesses, Chris and I have this conversation often where culture sometimes feels like this sort of esoteric, airy fairy, like no one can really define it, but we know if we have it and we all know we want it. And so I'd love to hear your definition of what is culture? How do you define culture in the workplace?
Yes, very simply, it is how people think and act to drive results. Period. It's not airy fairy. It's not woo woo. It's not a touchy feely thing. It cannot be delegated to HR. It has nothing to do with kombucha or ping pong tables or Hawaiian shirt Fridays. And I think it's so sad. I mean, it is a sad thing that it has gotten so distorted because of what the media wants to talk about when they talk about culture is those kind of things like, oh, look, Google has bring your dog to work day. That's an interesting culture. But that has nothing to do with culture. That's just a fun perk. And it doesn't have to do with how people think and act, meaning how do they
Yes.
make decisions? How do they communicate? How do we create outcomes together or not? And, those are the things that really drive results. Ultimately, culture equals results. When you think about it in that way, it's, are you driving results by the way your employees think and act, or aren't you? And so I believe that, our mission is to help businesses drive their intended results, whatever those are. 9 times out of 10, it's revenue, but sometimes it's not always a revenue focus. And the way that you can do that, the most powerful tool that you have to drive results is culture. When you think about culture the way that I just described.
I love that. Can you walk me through some of the principles of how you actually help companies set this up? Because I do think that this is something that gets distorted within corporate America, especially because I always call it the birthday cake culture, right? That people think by way of the bring your dog to work or celebrating the birthdays or doing these types of celebrations that it creates culture. And ultimately, I see the best cultures as the ones where people know how to behave, they know how to win, and above all, that they get to be part of a winning team. I don't see a whole lot of teams that walk off the field after they won that are feeling like they have a negative culture. And ultimately, I think that you can create that in organizations as well. And I'd love to hear how you actually, like, how do you do this in practice?
Yeah. And I think what I'm most proud of is how we do it so differently than all the other culture consultants out there. So, if you are the CEO of a company and you realize you need to work on your culture, which honestly, I would say the huge majority, I don't know what the percentage is, but the huge majority of our clients have good cultures. I don't see a lot of toxic workplace cultures come to us for help saying, we're totally upside down. We need you to come fix us, because the organizations that have toxic cultures don't really pay attention to culture. So they're not calling us for culture help. But the people who do think culture is an important part of how you drive results, those are the people that call us and they're like, we're good, but we want to be great, which surprised me, frankly. When I first went into this business, I thought we were going to be going into a bunch of totally dysfunctional companies and trying to turn things around. And that is the mindset that I think a lot of culture consultants come at their clients with. So what they do is they start with a needs assessment and they'll interview all of the people that they can, and they send out a survey, and they're basically looking for problems. And they're asking questions like, what hasn't been working? And what do you feel is misaligned? And how would you do it differently if you were in charge? And they find all of the complaints that they can. They extract complaints out of everyone. And then they put all those complaints into ChatGPT and synthesize the results, right? And then they give you a laundry list of, here's the 20 things that we found are broken with you, and we can help you solve that for the low, low price of $5 million or whatever it is, right? I mean, they basically lead with fear. They're saying this is a seriously big problem, and if you don't fix it, you're never going to be successful. And that is totally not how we do it. So we start with results. We're always number one focused on the results that you are getting. And so the first question we ask is, what results are you trying to achieve that you haven't been able to achieve yet? And what we usually end up talking about is people's vision, right? The 3 to 5 year, we think we can be a disruptor in this industry, or we think we can have organic growth of this outrageous number if we just, we think we can create a new product that has this perfect product market fit, that, whatever it is, they have some result that they can't quite grasp how to accomplish, or they just haven't yet. And we say, okay, great. That's the goal. We're going to start with the end in mind, the future possibility. And we're going to figure out, we're going to kind of reverse engineer a model we call the results pyramid, which is like what needs to happen in order for those results to get done, what actions need to be taken. And that's really looking at strategy. So the first set of conversations that we have with our clients is, what are you trying to achieve and what's the right strategy to get there? Which is exciting for CEOs, because it's not, here's what you've totally screwed up, right? Like, it's instead, here's what we can create together, right? But then here's the thing. Most leaders stop at that question, what strategy do we need? And then they like figure out the strategy, and then they just start trying to micromanage everyone's activities to execute on that strategy. And that is where you're not leaning into the power of culture. So we believe that people will take proactive action if their mindset and their beliefs are aligned with the action that you need them to take to get those results. So that's where we go, is
With the-
what are the shared beliefs that are currently getting in the way of you achieving those results? And what do you want those beliefs to be? So now we figure out the way people are thinking on that side of the thinking and acting equation. There's some ways of thinking that may be blocks to driving those transformative results you want to get. And so let's shift those to what they need to be. And we get very explicit about that. We label those beliefs, we call them cultural beliefs. And then what we do to scale and operationalize that, because what we've done so far is kind of memorialize culture, which a lot of companies do. They do mission, vision, values, and then they've got it on a plaque somewhere or on a PowerPoint slide, and then they don't know what to do with it. They just kind of send it out in an email, and they're like, these are our new values. And then we put it on a poster, and like, fingers
That's
crossed
it.
that
Yeah.
something happens, like something profit, right? And so what we do is we get intentional at every level of the organization, the frontline, the mid-level managers. What experiences do people need to have to share those new beliefs that you're trying to nurture? Because all of our beliefs come from experiences, and they're obviously not having the experiences that they need to have to drive those beliefs. So we got to shift those experiences. And that's the groundwork that we help operationalize and scale to activate culture, create new experiences that drive new beliefs, that get new actions out of your people that will get you the result you want. And so it's really staying in the fun space of culture, which is like, what's possible for us and how do we get there, rather than what have we done that was totally backwards and how do we fix that, which is backwards looking and not going to
Yeah.
progress the organization.
When you're getting into the beliefs, if you're galvanizing a team or an organization around a goal to give purpose and really drive the culture, I've seen that team members who are given goals or strategies with measures attached to it, they don't believe are possible, or they're not bought into that. So they have a belief that they can't achieve that. Is that something that you unpack with them to help them get to a place where they're bought in on what they own?
Yeah. So every organization has customized cultural beliefs that they need to nurture. And if one of the limiting beliefs that they hold together as a culture is that like these are impossible to achieve, then that gets addressed, right? So it just depends on what the current state beliefs are. And like there was one organization I was working with, and it was a mental health organization, and they were basically selling treatment for trauma. And the belief that the sales team held was that talking about trauma is limiting the market that we can address, because very few people have had trauma, because the way that they were thinking about trauma was the really scary, there are getting, mugged in an alley kind of trauma that very few people exist. And so one of the cultural beliefs that we nurtured was around everybody has some degree of trauma, right?
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, having a cell phone is traumatic in some ways. You're getting notifications and flash, and it's fragmenting our consciousness. And right, sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day is trauma because our bodies were not meant to sit. Remember, 5 years ago, they were saying that sitting is worse than smoking now. So the degrees of trauma that they realized existed across our society opened up the market that they realized they could address. It doesn't have to be scary, horrible movie level trauma. It can just be, my dad was kind of hard on me when I got bad grades, and so I want to get over the problems that I have as a result of holding on to that trigger. And it completely expanded their minds about who they could talk to about the product, and their sales shot through the roof. So it's specific to the organization, right?
Yeah.
And it's specific to the time that you are in the evolution of your organization. So different from values, these cultural beliefs are timely. So you're in one evolution of your organization, and then maybe after a year or two, you need to shift beliefs because that belief has been totally nurtured or is no longer relevant to the strategy. And so it's all about adapting and being able to keep the culture fluid and not getting stuck in one type of culture.
Jessica, I think this is so interesting because I would expect that in the work that you do, the problem that people think is the problem is often not the actual problem. And to me, you just described sort of what could have been symptomatic, i.e., we're not getting the numbers that we want to get, we're not hitting the sales numbers that we want to get, and most people aren't going to think to discern that we're not getting there because the belief is that there aren't enough people who have trauma or whatever the belief could have been. So how do you go about identifying and discerning that type of information? Is it just, are you interviewing the employees? Are you understanding what it is that they currently believe about why they're not getting there? Like, how do you figure that part out and then come to a conclusion that that's a shared belief?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a scientist, a data scientist, and we do everything based in data that we have been gathering. The company's been in business for 35 years. So we have been gathering data from organizations that we've been working with for decades now to understand what are the most frequently espoused beliefs that leaders say they need to instill in their organizations? What are the most effective beliefs that we've seen in organizations implement that actually did drive results? Which beliefs are more appropriate for which types of strategies? And so we have an assessment basically that we do with our clients to help them understand where they're going and what beliefs might help enable that. But then we also facilitate a conversation once we're in the room with everyone who's in that first workshop, where we're asking them the question, and you would be surprised or maybe not surprised by how consistent everyone is in their
Mhm.
opinions about those limiting beliefs. And it typically matches up with the data analysis that we've done on the front end. And then when we show them, like, here's what other organizations in a similar situation have done, it all becomes very commonsensical. Right. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's not like, well, actually, you thought you needed to be innovative and actually you need to be super bureaucratic about everything. It's not like that. Right. I mean, people kind of intuitively understand what's holding them back and what they need to overcome.
Beliefs can, especially limiting beliefs, can be sometimes fairly deeply rooted, and I'm sure it can be a challenge to unpack that. Like, how do you dig in and drive results? I mean, experiences like changing environment. Like, what's the best path to influence someone to get out of this mindset?
You said it, it's experiences. It's totally, the only thing that will change pre-existing beliefs is new experiences that help drive that new belief. So we get laser focused on all of the different kinds of experiences that people can co-create for each other. And, a very simple one is recognition. And I would even say the most powerful one is storytelling, right? Because hearing a story is an experience that will help me drive a new belief. Nonprofit charities are really good at leveraging the power of storytelling to drive action, right? They tell you the story, or you saw those commercials of the children in Africa with distended bellies, or the dogs in the pound, and they're creating an experience for you when they tell that story, so that you're going to that's going to drive a belief. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. I have to do something about it. I can be part of the solution. Here's my action. I'm going to donate, and that will get them a result, revenue, right? So it's leveraging the power of story, which we have opportunities to tell each other stories at work in every single meeting that we have, in every single casual conversation that we have, in all the emails that we send. I mean, the opportunity to create experiences is limitless. It's just, are we being intentional about the experiences we're creating in those moments or not? And most people are not most of the time. And so we've created accidental cultures by just working on autopilot and creating experiences without being conscious of what we've created in that moment. It's not rocket science. It's really just about consistently being intentional. And that's a big part of what we do is we're present to remind people to be consistently intentional until it feels like a muscle that they've developed. And then it's just part of our regular processes. And then it's part of the culture. And then we walk away and we say, you're welcome.
Jessica, you said earlier, I feel like I would be doing a disservice to our audience if I didn't ask this question, because there's so many business owners and executives that listen to our podcast. But you said that you've discerned this information over 35 years that the company has been in existence. And you found that there are certain very effective beliefs. And I'd love to know if there are some specific ones that you find these are the most effective beliefs that can be imparted into an organization.
Yeah, this was, I mean, my highlight of my year last year was figuring this out. We partnered with Stanford to look at that 30 years worth of data set to understand which is the best culture, right? I mean, it's the $1 million question is
Yeah.
what culture is the right culture? And everyone has a different opinion based on their experiences. Why every single culture book you read out there brings their own perspective. You need to have the Netflix culture, the Zappos culture, all these different culture types. So we wanted to figure out which one actually wins. And so first we did an analysis of all of the 30 years of history, what our clients are asking for the most, and analyzing it through the lens of what results were created. And the top ones that were most requested were a collaborative culture, a culture of accountability, a results-oriented culture, a transparent culture, and a customer-obsessed culture, in that order. So we were thinking one of those was probably going to be the right answer. And so we sent all this data over to Stanford, and we were working with the foremost organizational culture expert over there. And he said, these are great. Can I add other culture dimensions that we have tested in previous studies? And we'll just give them the full range of choices and we'll see which one wins. And I said, yes, absolutely. So we added a couple others in there. None, literally none of the culture types that our clients have asked for made a significant impact on revenue results. None of them. There was only one culture type that actually drove significant increase in revenue results to the tune of 4x. So all the other culture types were, growing step by step. And then this one culture type was 4x, and that was an adaptable culture. So here's what's super fascinating about that. All of the types that our clients have asked for were one type, a static culture type, right?
Right.
We want a collaborative culture. We want a results-oriented culture. And what this study showed us was actually the key is to never get stuck in one of those. The key is to be able to switch from collaborative to results-oriented to transparent. And if you have the muscle to where you're able to switch between cultures, that's actually the differentiator. And what I got very excited about, because it just felt like it fell in our lap, is what we're actually expert in is helping people shift culture and have an adaptive culture to go from this to that. So it validated our entire business model, like surprisingly, but very excitingly, was that actually let's be super culture agnostic in how we support our clients. So I never go in and say, you need to be more X. We say, right now, given your strategy and to align with your purpose, it looks like this is the need. We'll help you learn how to shift from here to there, but then keep that in mind because next year you might need to shift somewhere else. And we're going to help you learn how to move cultures from one type to another, which is very hard to do. It's really easy to switch strategy, right? You just get in a room with a bunch of executives, you change your mind, you write it down and you deliver it. And now you've got a new strategy. But to shift culture, to shift how people think and act, that's like steering a massive ship and trying to get it to turn. And I think we've kind of cracked the code on how to do that. So it made me feel very validated in what we're doing and the value that we provide.
Does that need for adaptability put an emphasis on like microcultures almost? Like if you're in a large organization, is it important then that smaller teams have the ability to kind of shift what to emphasize versus trying to steer the whole ship at once?
Yeah, so it's really about focusing on that belief level and understand what cultural beliefs do we need to focus on now and then next quarter and next year. And that's where we're talking. It's not about macro versus micro culture. Having said that, every microculture has their own strategy, right?
Mm.
There's the global strategy, and then there's the, well, what is the marketing team's marketing strategy for delivering on that global strategy in their little piece of the world, and what is the sales team's sub strategy? And so each sub strategy also needs subcultures that show up differently in how they deliver to that global strategy. And so we do see variations in that way, but those broader cultural beliefs that get decided upon in the assessment on the front end, those are shared across the organization, but obviously the way that we demonstrate those beliefs is what varies in the
Mm.
microcultures.
It's interesting to me too that within these microcultures, you can still create the overarching culture that you're looking for, right? That you can still create an environment wherein the thematics of the culture remains in alignment with the overall organization. But that's what you're trying to do with a strategy too, right? Everybody has their piece of whatever it is that they do toward that greater goal. And that's all part of these sub strategies within the greater one. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world. And it mirrors exactly what you're trying to do in the actual business plan itself. I'd love to get in to Jessica. In the book, you talk a lot about generational cultures, and I think this is so important to understand as it pertains to, I have to imagine there's an element of working through the beliefs that people walk into the company with about how work should be, or what success looks like, or how we should treat each other, or whatever that may be. And I find this to be so interesting as a person that's a part. I think all three of us probably are a part of the culture that's the hottest topic of late, which is the millennials, and all the trouble that we bring into the world. And I always find it so interesting to give an overarching generalization of any generation, because it's hard to presume that any one person could match a profile of millions of people, and yet we do. And I believe that we all, as we get older, say, "I'm never going to do what my predecessors did," which is back in my day sort of conversation. And yet we find ourselves doing that, even so. Or rather, I shouldn't give the royal we. I find myself doing that even so. And so I'd love to hear how this element brings in to creating an overarching culture as well.
That's a great question. So this is another example of me doing quantitative research with going in with a thesis and then being completely misproven with, on my own thinking at on the other end of it, and actually getting really excited about that. It's really fun when what you think gets totally turned upside down in research, because it makes you feel like you're discovering something as opposed
Yeah.
to just validating yourself. And so um, I thought that when I did my doctoral research, that I was going to find these trends across each generation that could then justify various business decisions around customizing how you attract, retain, and engage talent at each generational level to be more effective. And, no one size fits all approach that then I was going to turn into a multi-million-dollar business was my dream. Right. And what I found was that the differences in the generations didn't exist
Mhm.
nearly to the level that I thought that they were going to the point that, I mean, not only were like learning styles the same across generation, but even preferences on technological tools that we use at work were the same across generations, which is a technology thing that you would really think that the digital natives versus the digital immigrants would have different opinions on, and they didn't. So what I realized was so much of that entire industry is just a bunch of BS. And these are consultants that want to have an opinion so they can create $1 million businesses just like me, right? And you have to have an opinion, a point of view in order to sell a solution on that point of view. So my point of view as I came out of the research was, that's not a thing. Stop doing that. And I didn't try to become a keynote speaker. I really didn't even know that that was a career. I just thought people need to hear this. People need to know this because everyone's so upside down. And this was 10 years ago when the millennial fever was just outrageous, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote the book, it got published by Wiley, and it just blew up. And I I didn't expect that at all, frankly, and I wasn't prepared for it. But then I started getting invited to speak about these things. And my messaging was, I'm going to come and be your millennial savior that teaches you how to attract, retain, and engage talent. And then I'd get on stage, like I hoodwinked all of my clients, I would get on stage and be like, so tell me what you know about millennials. And then they would shout out these stereotypes that everyone knows about millennials. They're lazy, they're entitled, they're tech savvy, whatever. And then I would flip to the next slide and I would say, now, what if I asked you to tell me about a different label? And I changed, instead of, Gen Z, millennial, baby boomer, I changed it to whites, blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. And I'm like, so what do you know about the black employees? Anyone? And then it was silent and uncomfortable. And I'm like, right, exactly. Because it's obvious how inappropriate it is to
Right.
label people based on that demographic. But this demographic is socially acceptable, but really it's ageism hiding in a generational label that is socially acceptable. And so we've got Fortune articles and Wall Street Journal articles about the millennial generation. And it's like, has the world gone mad? Have we all gone mad? And it was, I think, the reception I got was people felt so refreshed by that perspective that they were like, there was something in my gut that made me think that that was a weird thing, but I couldn't quite figure it out. And so my perspective is, a lot of the differences that we see are life stage differences and not generational differences. We do have different priorities earlier in our career and later in our career. I could share with you stat after stat that proves that to be the case, including things like work ethic. It changes through our life stages, and the baby boomers, when they were 20, were a lot like millennials today. So maybe we're all not that different. And then also, that what you're seeing is shifting in employee expectations based on the nature of work and the multi-directional information sharing has completely transformed the transparency levels of organizations and leadership styles. 30 years ago, it was all top-down communications, right? And now you've got people live quitting their jobs on TikTok and sharing screenshots of text messages with their bosses and putting, interview processes in Glassdoor. And like everyone is exposed, your inner culture is now exposed to the public. And so the dirty secrets that everyone got away with in the past, you can't really get away with that anymore. So everyone's expectations are rising. And then it seems like Gen Z is high maintenance because expectations are rising because of that information sharing that has exposed us. But I think it's a good thing. And I think I've actually got an op-ed that I'm desperately trying to get published right now called Who's Entitled Now? And what I'm trying to make the point about is it is entitled of the older generation leaders to think that they can keep using the same old practices and not up their game based on what expectations are of employees today. That's the entitlement, to think like they should put up with us. It's like, well, maybe you need to adapt, which literally is what our research shows wins, right? And the companies that are adapting, they are winning. That's what we're seeing with our clients. So yeah, I could go on about this. I have a lot of strong opinions about generational dynamics.
Well, I think it's so important to your point. I think that we don't stop always to rethink the way that we have always done it, right? Whether it's the we as the company or we as the individual or the we as the leader, and that there could be a better way. We just need to pay attention. And I think
Totally.
one of the coolest things about meeting someone like you who's a true scientist, and this is a bit of an aside, but in relation to what you're learning and what you're sharing with us and what we're learning, and hopefully the audience is in this conversation as well, is I've noticed with those of our guests, especially that we get to connect with, that are true scientists that review data and review studies, that you're approaching every one of those with a hypothesis, which basically says like, I'm just open to failure. I'm open to being disproven. And if more of us could approach our day to day that way, not only would failure not have the same attachment that it does to most people, right? That it's just a hypothesis that we were wrong about or a belief that we were potentially wrong about, but it opens us up to learning and being educated in an entire new way of doing things that actually is a better avenue to get us to where we want to go, which is all I'm hearing from you. It's like I asked the right questions and I paid attention to what the answers were, and then I found a better path forward.
And I was willing to get my mind changed. I
Yeah,
think that's something that we need more of in this world is, are you willing to get your mind completely changed?
Yeah.
I love that.
On the concept of adaptability, how much has the shift to virtual work from home environment influenced how you approach culture and strategy? I mean, fundamentally, I would imagine it's the same framework, but slightly different application. And I think of things like the frills you talked about, like the ping pong tables and all that, that obviously have their flaws. Then you saw like virtual happy hours and things happening. And I'm just curious, like what you've seen and what maybe works better in this environment, for the sake of adaptability.
Yeah. Good question. So, the experiences that we create for each other can happen in a virtual environment just as much as in an in-person environment. When my boss texts me, that's an experience,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So, I don't need to be at the office for culture to be created. And the people who are like, we're losing our culture, I understand immediately. You don't understand culture because nothing is getting lost in a virtual environment. The experiences are getting moved to a different medium, right?
Mhm.
Virtual medium. So here's what I notice, or my personal position on this is the when you hear about leaders trying to get people back into
Hmm.
the office, keyword being back, or read the articles about return to office, keyword being return. Those two words, back and return, they're about going backwards. It's about returning to the past, and they are living in a dream world in which we are 5 years ago, the way that it once was, the way that it used to be. And they're treating COVID like it was a pause button. And now we're pressing unpause. And so everything should go back to how it was before the world totally changed. And COVID wasn't a pause, it was a transformational moment in our culture and our thinking. And so we're now in a new place. We have evolved into the current day reality of work, and we can't go back. We just can't go back because we know differently now, right? We know that it's possible to work virtually, and we know what is easier and what isn't easier in a virtual environment. And so what I see this return to office obsession is from CEOs is the lack of adaptability. It's
Mhm.
literally the inability to progress into the next evolution of work, and they are stuck in the thing that they want it to be, which is they knew how to do that. So they just want to go back to what they knew how to do and where they were comfortable, and they're not thinking, how can we step our game up and create results and leverage the opportunities here, because there's a ton of opportunity in a virtual environment with regards to hiring and the speed of communication. I mean, there's so much that's good in it, and mental well-being, not to mention, right? And you got to figure that out. In my opinion, even though the numbers say that we have plateaued on the return to office, I think that the future is virtual.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, I don't anyone who doesn't think that, I don't understand. And that if you are the CEO of a company right now, get your real estate budget and turn it into a travel budget, because getting together in person is still important. I think that something secret sauce magic happens that I don't know how to describe when you get to see someone in person that is good. And that's as far as I know what that's
Hmm.
about, right? But I don't need to see you every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to get that goodness. Like at our company, we use our real estate budget for travel, and we get together once a quarter as a leadership team, and we see each other once a quarter, and it's uplifting, and that magic sauce happens, and then we go back to our homes and we have work-life balance. And so I think, I'm not knocking leadership retreats, because a lot of my revenue comes from leadership retreats as a keynote speaker. I'm a huge fan of leadership retreats. And having said that, it doesn't have to be 3 times a week. That's just, I don't help that make sense. The math isn't mathing. I don't
Mm.
get that.
Well, I think it's interesting too, Jessica, because when you talk to business owners, high level executives, one of their biggest challenges is finding talent, and I find the sort of aversion to this virtual environment very interesting, because it's a great way to unlock talent. You no longer have the issue of trying to convince someone to move or matching a salary number in order to get them to move or whatever that may be. To me, it's the best of both worlds, and it's interesting, especially knowing that one of the biggest challenges these big companies face is finding C-suite executives, high-level executives that they must have in person. When if they just release themselves to a virtual environment, they could hire the best of the best and let them stay where they are.
Totally. I mean, make it make sense. It's not making any sense, right? My family member, I don't want to do too much identifying information because she'll get mad at me, but my family member has been working within a healthcare system for a long time, and she works in a role that could easily be done from home. And she works with a bunch of people who do work from home. But her particular role has historically been an in office role. And that's just the way that it's been. She went to her supervisors and said, I've now got a parent that I need to take care of that I'm taking care of at home. I've got these two kids. I just have to work from home now. So if you can help me move to an in-home role doing the same thing, that would be great. If not, I have to quit. And all of the people that are in that decision-making process got together and they had a bunch of meetings about it. And as they walked out of the room, they were like, sorry, we're not going to shift you to working from home because the big boss just can't get past the idea that people are just going to be at home doing their laundry. And so that's an experience, right? Let's go back to our model. That's an experience that led to a belief. And the belief she told me she holds is that they don't think I have integrity.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's it, right? Like, you think I'm going to cheat you. And that belief led to an action, which is she's going to quit, which she even told them she was going to quit. And that's going to get them a result. Now, one of their top performers in that department, which by the way is a lower level worker, right? Which already you see this elitism about like executives are allowed to work from home. And this department that gets paid that much is allowed to work from home. But the lower level workers, they're going to be doing laundry. So we don't trust them because they get paid less, right? Which is super problematic. And she's been there for 10 years. She has got this wealth of information that they are going to struggle without, right? So that is what we're trying to help avoid, is what experiences are making people feel like I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not valued, I don't make a difference, they don't trust me, I don't belong, right? My TED Talk was called can I curse on this podcast?
Hit it.
Hit it? Okay, my TED Talk was called How to Get People to Give a Shit. And the answer is you create an experience which makes them feel like they're a part of the thing, right?
Yeah.
You create a belief that like, I'm important here, I'm adding value, I'm part of a purpose that's important, and I'm valued for what I do. That's how you get people to give a shit. Not, did you do your 10 tasks? Can you please report on how many of the 10 tasks you did and how effective those tasks were? That's like activity management that is micromanagement. It leads to burnout and it doesn't get you results at all. Well, actually, that's not fair. Sorry, let me say one more thing. It does get you results,
It's not the ones you want.
but only this much results. And not
Yeah.
those transformative 4x results that you can get when you get at getting people to give a shit, you know?
Well, I'd love for you to speak a little bit more to experiences, because I can already tell you that originally my mind went to, so I bet that it's happening to some of our listeners too. When we talk about experiences that create culture, I bet that a lot of people are going to go to, oh, it's getting in person to do a kumbaya retreat, or it's the forcing everybody to go to lunch, or forcing everybody to the virtual happy hour. And I don't think
No,
that's what you mean. So tell us more about
totally.
what an experience is, an effective
Yeah.
experience.
Thank you for clarifying that, because it's none of those things. I mean, those are experiences, fine, but did they really drive a belief about how we should think and act? Like, no, those are whatever. But they are storytelling. I mentioned those, right?
Mhm.
So I begin each team meeting that I have. My executive begins each team meeting. Every department leader at our company starts every single meeting with telling stories about and those stories are often, they double as a second experience, which is really frequently useful, is recognition. So when someone does something great, what recognition typically looks like is, great job, Nikki, you killed it, here's an award. And then Nikki feels great, she's been recognized publicly, she was rewarded for that, and it's like hopefully more of that happens. But that is like 10% of what you need to do when you recognize someone. What you really, if you want recognition to pack a punch, first of all, you need to identify what Nikki did specifically that was positive, right? Nikki, the thoughtful questions and preparation that you did in this podcast was really mind blowing. Okay, there's the action. Now I'm going to tie it to the belief that we're trying to intentionally nurture. So I'm like, by doing that prep work and asking those thoughtful questions, you have demonstrated the cultural belief of customer obsession. Let's pretend I'm a customer, right? So now we've decided customer obsession is important, and I'm showing you how you have just demonstrated customer obsession as a cultural belief. And then to close it out, I've got to show how that's going to drive results. By doing that, you're going to help us with our customer retention rate goal of 95%. So you're just making the implicit explicit, because all of those things were true in the minds of everyone when you got the award for doing a great job, right? It was like, you did a great job, here's the award. But now we're spelling it out for all the people who aren't paying attention, right? It's like, this is what she did. This is how it demonstrated that belief. This is how it's going to drive results. You get it? And then people are like, oh, I see how I can demonstrate that belief. And that's the activation part of cultural beliefs that so many people miss the mark on. So storytelling, recognition, and then feedback, right? So I could then say, Nikki, here's how you could have demonstrated the cultural belief of customer obsession even more. And then I make a suggestion of something you didn't do. And it's a non-threatening, you know, offering that you might realize like, oh yeah, I could have done that. And then here's how that would have helped us drive results. So you're just like intentional about language to help spell it out for people, because so much of what we don't say, people miss, right? And then there's also systems. I mean, I have an experience when I'm onboarded. I have an experience when I'm doing my performance evaluation. The approval matrix for your budgets are an experience. How many people do I need to get approval for to spend $500? There's thousands of experiences that your systems create. And so doing a deep dive on that is also part of what we do to make sure that you don't say one thing and then the behavior and the what people are experiencing in the systems is completely antithetical to what you're supposedly trying to
Mm.
nurture.
I think there's like some ownership you need to take as a leader, even if you're not a leader, a teammate, to create experiences. It's easy to just say, "Hey, let's
Yep.
blaze forward," but not be considerate of the experiences and alignment with culture or values that you are trying to embody. It's like lead from the front, but also be intentional.
Yeah, I mean, so our company was actually built on the concept of creating a culture of accountability. That's where we started. It was all about driving accountability, and then it expanded, right? And I don't know if you guys have read the book The Oz Principle. It was written 35 years ago. It's still top of the charts
Mm.
business book, and it's all about how to drive accountability at work. And that was our founders wrote that book and kind of built the company off the back of that book. And the concept that they shared, which was so simple, was there's two kinds of belief systems in when it comes to accountability: above the line and below the line. And below the line thinking is, it's not my fault, I didn't know anything about that, that's not my job, I'm going to cover my ass, that's his problem, no one told me. It's just all the victim mentality. It's like, that's not my job. Like, I worked at Oracle for 10 years. There's 144,000 employees at Oracle. Larry Ellison does not create that culture, right? I mean, everyone knows Larry Ellison. He's on the cover of Time. He's got the island in Hawaii. But I didn't spend a bunch of time with Larry. I was in the trenches with my peers side by side and my direct manager. And the culture was created by us for
Mhm.
each other, right? And so to say leadership isn't doing a good job at creating the right culture is below the line thinking. And so we have this model to help people go above the line. Simply having that language is really useful to be able to say in a call, if we're all being complainy about something, saying, I wonder if we're below the line right now. What would it look like to go above the line? That alone makes a huge difference in shifting the mindset. And above the line is, making a personal choice to focus on what I can
Mm.
control. And so many of the times we focus on what we can't control. That's frustrating. The regulation, the policy, the approval, the executive decision, all those things can mire us down in below the line thinking. But when I accept where I exist and I go above the line, I become free. And I'll tell you a story to demonstrate how I did this at Oracle before I even knew this model. So Oracle has a low attrition rate because you get really great benefits, you have crazy good work-life balance, you're working on super interesting projects, the company is always winning and growing, and the people are cool. So people don't quit Oracle. But the pay is not like top of the tier every time, right? Like, you get paid top of the tier when you join, and then like they don't really do pay increases like ever. So there's something that the compensation team confidentially called the loyalty tax, which is the longer you work here, the less you get paid for your value, because they don't do big jumps in pay. And all these HR leaders and the managers were like, this is outrageous. We need to, but executives looked at the attrition numbers and they're like, people aren't quitting. Why would we pay more if they're staying? And I got to figure that out on day one when I was involved in a compensation project in my role. I was doing culture transformation work there, and I kind of figured this out. It was the best kept secret at Oracle. People didn't realize this. So they spent all this time being frustrated about not getting raises. And on day one, I'm like, oh, I'm never going to get a raise. Okay. So every year when I would get the like 0.5% raise that like basically changed my paycheck by $20 a month, I was like, thank you so much. What a generous raise, because I was expecting nothing. And I knew that I was trading that potential pay for the lifestyle and the projects and the ability to put Oracle on my resume. Like this is what I can control. I can control to focus on the positive and not hate life because I know what I signed up for. And it frees you. You know, I was completely free from all of the toxicity that comes with being upset about the things you can't control. So I think it actually helps people be happier at work, which is not the explicit goal of what we do, but it is a nice to have, you know?
Well, it also everything I'm hearing from you, even in your example, which I love, by the way. I hope that everybody listening took notes and is going to go back and use this, which is the belief followed by how you demonstrated the belief, followed by how it affected results, which just teaches me how to behave. And I think that that's something that we miss as leaders so often, that people don't understand how to connect the dots. A strong leader intuitively connects the dots. That's why they became a strong leader, why they are a strong leader. But so many others don't. And you can create more strong leaders by teaching them to connect the dots and teaching them to behave in a way that exemplifies the culture that you're looking for. I wish we could keep you here, Jessica, because I have about 1,000 more questions. And if you'll come back, we'd love to have you again. And yet at the end of this podcast, we always ask, what's the one thing you would want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
Okay, so it's not something we've actually talked about yet, but I guess it's the implicit philosophy underneath all of what we talked about. So here I will make it explicit, as we were just saying. There is a war out there on the black and white thinking of business that I hope you can see through now. The narrative is you're either about profits and you exploit people, or you're about people and you're crappy at business, right? It's like this idea that it's people versus profits. And as economic cycles go from a good market to a bad market, we invest in people and then we divest in people and we make more profit and we lose profit. And it's like you have to pick. That's not true. When you understand the gray area that we've been talking about here, that it is the people that drive results in the way that they think and act, and you get the most results as a business leader when your people give a shit. And the people who give a shit are actually super motivated to stay because they care so deeply, and the business wins and the people wins. It's like we realize we're not on opposite ends of the spectrum. Employees and CEOs can be on the same side of the winning aisle when you connect the dots about this, and we stop making culture about ping pong tables and kombucha and all of the other silly things that have nothing to do with the day-to-day work life. I hope that your listeners got that out of this conversation, that there's a middle place that is harder to see, harder to advocate for, but is where everybody wins, and I want everyone there.
Well, I certainly did. I hope they did too. And like I said, I'm going to convince you to come back on to talk more about it, because I think this is a really important conversation. Jessica, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Well, I have my own daily podcast. It's a 5-minute episode every morning called Culture Leaders Daily. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I've got a newsletter there called This Week in Culture that comes out every Friday. And you can go to my website, which is jessicakriegel.com. Jessica Kriegel spelled Kriegel. And I have fun things on there all the time. Challenges that you can do with your teams, insights of the week, all of our media appearances, whatever you want. Oh, and then check out Culture Partners, which is culturepartners.com.
Awesome. And we'll drop all that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for pouring into us and to our audience today.
Thanks for having me. It was a total pleasure.